Before we say goodbye to chapter 2, I wanted to pay lip service to a topic that the book doesn't really get into very much, but I think it's important. Namely, that there are more statistically good graphs that are more complicated than those that we've presented. We've really presented the most basic and simple type of graphs, and that's good. Simple graphs are often, well done, but complication doesn't necessarily make it bad. Sometimes graphs are complicated, but it's okay because they're trying to portray more complex ideas. And I thought, let's take the time to really kind of analyze some harder to read graphs and see what they can tell us about the world. Even if they're not always the best graph, they still can be well read and they're not necessarily misleading or distorting. For example, this is a graph. Let me zoom out a little bit. This is a graph that I got from the census website of Canada, and this is about the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal populations for La Tuque, which is an area in Quebec, small area in Quebec. So it's a really fascinating graph. It's very complicated. It has a lot of things going on. You've got axes here, you've got your ages here. It's a little bit like a split stem and leaf plot, but it's not a stem and leaf plot, of course. And then you have this line here which shows the ages of people, and then you have the bars. Okay. Now the line is, it says up here in the legend, the non-Aboriginal, and the bars are the Aboriginal. So you can see that there's a very big difference in this area of Quebec for the ages for people that are Aboriginal, Aboriginal of course being Native American, and those that are non-Aboriginal, right? So the non-Aboriginals tend to have an average that's in the middle, well, somewhere around the 45 to 50 range, somewhere in here. That's where their middles, their centers are. But the Aboriginal population has its highest peaks down here in the small children, right? And that shows that this area of Quebec has large amounts of older people that are non-Aboriginal and younger people that are Aboriginal. Very few Aboriginals people make it to the age of 60, 69, and so on. Far more non-Aboriginal people make it that far. All right, and that's what I'm going to type up. And for a graph like this, you're not going to have to construct a graph like this, but you have to know how to read it, and you have to know what you're looking at. So the graph shows, let me pause and type, and I'll be right back. There we go. This graph shows that in this area of Quebec, the vast majority of young Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, are young. Not many older Aboriginal people stay in the area, or they could die, they could move away. Not really sure. Most of the non-Aboriginal people are older. Their average age is around 45 to 50, and there are very few non-Aboriginal young people in this area, right? So there's a very big disparity between the Aboriginals and non-Aboriginal people in this area. The Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this area of Quebec. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is a really fascinating graph that I saw, and this one uses circles. And remember, I talked about circles in the last video, about how there was no scale given on, let me scroll back up to it, this graph right here. It was a couple videos ago. They're using circles, but it's kind of pointless because they didn't give us any scale. But down here, that's okay. They are giving us a scale. They're telling us what the size of dots mean. What's 50, what's 100, and what's 250, right? And you can see they have the data to accompany it as well, right? And that helps judge what's happening in a more fair way. And you can see that huge circle right there, right? That's an area of the country that's been gaining a lot of African American population. And the big red circles near LA, near New Orleans, near New York City right there, even Detroit and Chicago, those have been losing African American population. Let me type that up. There we go. Overall, the graph shows us a big trend of African Americans leaving the West and the North for the South, with the exception, of course, of New Orleans during that time period.